Yes, I am. It's 5 o'clock and time to convene the meeting for tonight. Let the record show that all board members are present, including Eddie Robinson, Superintendent, Tanya Baker, Clerk, and Scott Mullins, Attorney. I would now ask that we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That moves down to approval of agenda. Is there any suggested changes for the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
Make a motion that we approve the agenda then. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have agenda approved. That moves us down to public hearing for the PPA process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Curtis Ellswick, Senior Vice President and Regional Executive with Skanska, to come and to report on the PPA process, and then we will open the meeting for public comment for the PPA. Welcome, Mr. Ellswick.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back in front of you tonight in this wonderful facility. As you're well aware, tonight, the purpose of tonight is to hold a public hearing on the PPA proposal and to receive feedback from the public on those proposals, which are made available.
Excuse me, Mr. Ellswick, do you mind turning your microphone on, sir? Yes, sir. And if you could.
Here we go.
All right,
I need
if
to
you'll
start
start. Yes.
Okay. Good evening. As you're aware, the purpose of tonight's public hearing is to receive feedback from the public on the PPA proposals, which are made available for public review. To clarify, it is not a public hearing on the site for an elementary school. It's particularly for the PPA proposals and the process that we are undergoing. I would like to provide a little bit of background information on which outlines how we got to where we are today. Back in 2018, as I mentioned the last time I was here, Dickinson County Public Schools issued an RFP that solicited proposals from design-build teams for a new elementary school. 3 proposals were submitted. Those proposals were vetted and carefully evaluated, and all 3 at the time were determined to be of further interest to the school system and the selection committee. After a brief pause, we requested detailed phase proposals from those 3 teams here just 2 or 3 months ago, and we received 3 quality proposals from those teams. And after careful evaluation at the last board meeting, the board selected the Questenberry's OWPR, the Lane Group design build team as best suited for the project. So following tonight's public hearing, the intent is to enter into negotiations with that team and to negotiate what we call an interim agreement per your PPA guidelines. And that interim agreement would allow the design to move forward up to the point where that team would present what they call a guaranteed maximum price for construction. And that would also allow you to pick a site, move the project forward to completion at that time. So the purpose of tonight is to hear public comment, consider that feedback. The process outlined that you have per your PPA guidelines is that you cannot enter in that interim agreement no sooner than 30 days following the public hearing, which is the middle of July. So at that time, it would be the intent to execute that agreement to allow design to move forward at that point. So unless there's any questions for me, that's what we're at as of today.
Is there any motions we need to make?
Not at this time, Dr. Lyle. Mr. Ellswick, you've been in touch with Questenberry's, and are they doing any work now to help the board deal with preliminary issues that might be associated with both sites that have been discussed?
Yeah, where we are at now is I am drafting an interim agreement for their review, which would include terms and conditions and everything that we've received from them today. In the meantime, they have went ahead at their own risk of evaluating the two sites that we've been talking about, Ridgeview and Clinchco, and to verify that they can site an elementary school, at least 62,000 square foot elementary school at those sites. They are looking into the environmental permitting process to confirm how long that should take and what the pros and cons would be at each site. And they are updating their cost estimates based on those two sites, knowing what they know today. So they are jumping ahead to try to expedite the process.
And they're doing that at their own risk. They're not being paid for that.
Correct.
And would some of that information be available at the next regularly scheduled meeting of the school board in June?
Probably within a week.
Members of the board, and again tonight, was an opportunity to for the public to comment on the PPA process. It's on the process. There's no agreement entered. It's just how we go about procuring under the PPA, which Mr. Ellswick said, the first thing we do is we pick a team, and that's what you did at the last meeting. And then we have preliminary discussions, and Mr. Ellswick, if I say this wrong, please correct me, but the goal is sometime out in the next, in July, to be able to come back with some sort of interim agreement. And the purpose of that agreement would be to get them doing design work so that they could design a school that the contractor could build that they're working with that would be within a guaranteed maximum price. And to be clear, what we've always said to the public and to the Board of Supervisors is that that price would be the amount of money that's available through the Corps of Engineers, no more. There would be no additional money requested from the Board of Supervisors, and there would be no legal obligation on the Board of Supervisors for risks associated with this. The contract would be solely between the school board and the contractor, and the only thing that we would want to make sure of course, is that we can comply with the terms of the contract. That's a big thing, making sure we have the money, particularly including the interim financing that we'd be needing, and making sure that with the help of Skanska, you as a school board understand exactly what you're buying for that guaranteed maximum price. You know, where a school would be, how big it would be, the quality of the materials, everything from the roofing down, you know, the flooring, and that is what Skanska and Mr. Ellswick help us, is to make sure that what the folks that are proposing that they build for us, make sure that that is of the quality that we would expect. And then if we get to the point where we have agreed upon that through the process, the interim agreement, then the final thing to do would be the comprehensive agreement, which is actually the deal to build the school. So I hate to go over that. I know you probably are familiar with that, but for your sake and for anyone that might be listening on the public, I wanted you to understand the time frame. And Mr. Ellswick, is it fair to say that if we were to move forward, you would hopefully be in a position to be talking about a comprehensive agreement to actually build the school sometime in maybe January or February? Or?
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah. Is that goal time sensitive as far as getting us in school during the appropriate times of the summer? Maybe you could tell the board a little bit about that.
Yeah, per the schedule that we're negotiating with the design build team, is the intent is if we can execute an interim agreement in July, that would allow them time to design a school and have pretty much the design complete by the end of the year, and then we would enter into negotiations for the comprehensive agreement, which is for construction, probably in the January timeframe, which would allow them to start construction in early spring in order to meet a fall 2022 school opening. But any sliding of that schedule means we would probably miss that fall 22 opening date.
And just to make sure that the board and the public understand, we had 3 groups of people that were builders and architects and civil engineers propose. The Quisenberry group, just maybe very briefly for the public, who is Quisenberry, who is OWPR, and who's the Lane group?
So Quisenberry's is a general contractor out of Big Stone Gap. They have actually done several projects in Dickinson County. Probably one of the factors considered when they were selected is they've probably done more projects in Dickinson County than the competing teams. They just finished the converting Longs Fork School for the offices of Department of Social Services. They're building the Health Wagon Clinic up by the Deeser building. They've done a lot of work at UVA Wise. We got one reference from UVA Wise that pretty much said they are the only contractor they would use on their campus for a major project, which was a great reference. So I've worked with them before. They're a known quantity. OWPR is a design firm based out of Blacksburg that has a lot of experience in K-12 schools throughout Virginia and West Virginia. And so they bring a wealth of experience in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. And they've worked in the county before, actually for the Board of Supervisors, doing some school assessments. The Lane Group is out of, you may know better than me, Scott. They out of Wise?
They have Abingdon and Wise office, I
Yeah.
believe.
But they do a lot of work here in the county in Southwest Virginia. They're part of the team is to provide environmental consulting as well as some civil engineering. And so they know the area very well, have a great reputation. So I feel like we've got a very solid team that has the experience. The other thing that was considered is not only their experience, but this is on a tight schedule. And to meet that schedule, they had to have the capacity to do it and make sure that their staff was available to hit the ground running. And as you can tell, they're already hitting the ground running at their own risk and maybe not even being paid, but they've shown that commitment to the project, which I commend them for. So I'm happy to answer any other questions about those teams, but I think the school board was consulted and felt like they were the best suited for this project.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for Mr. Ellsworth?
Thank you, Mr. Ellswick.
All right.
There's
Thank
no
you.
other questions. Before we begin the public hearing, if Mr. Mullins, if you will please read our public comment policy, and also if we have any phone calls, Mr. Wallace, if you could let me know, we certainly would appreciate it. Thank you.
A period of time for public comment will be designated on the meeting agenda during which the public may comment on issues related to public education. The Dickens County Board believes that the citizens of the county should be heard, and this is an acceptable format for receiving public comment. After the public comment section of the meeting is closed, the public shall not be allowed to participate in general board member discussions regarding agenda items. Public participation with the board members regarding agenda items can be disruptive, and the practice is prohibited by the Roberts Rules of Order. It is the desire of the school board to treat each member of the public fairly and equally. Allowing one individual to participate while excluding the others is unfair. The board may hold such public hearings as may be necessary to allow the public to more fully express their concerns, or the board may place the public comment section of any meeting at the end of the meeting to allow additional public comments. While we do not wish to restrict the free expression of opinion, we feel that the certain restrictions may be necessary so that the order and reasonable standards of decorum may be maintained. We ask that the following standards be adhered to. The speaker will be recognized by the chair. Each speaker will be limited to 5 minutes. Speakers will refrain from the use of vulgarity or profanity and will avoid negative or embarrassing comments towards specific children or students. Board members should not respond to issues presented by speakers unless clarification is necessary. Matters of concern raised under public comment will be referred to the proper official for investigation and the future board consideration, if necessary. Now that's the rules for the public comment. Same rules for the public hearing. And if anyone who has any materials for the school board or information for the office, that you can get them to the central office where they will be distributed to the school board members.
Thank you, Mr. Mullins. And for our public that may be listening, the number is 835-1620, 835-1620 for calling in public comment. Again, that number is 835-1620.
The first name on the list is David Yates.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Robinson,
Good evening, Mr. Yates.
other staff members. I guess what perplexes me is why we're still talking about Ridgeview as a site. And I refer to the Facilities Development Agreement that was initially signed and by all parties involved. Item 8 on page 2 is the goal of the parties to construct educational facilities at locations that are reasonably centrally located to the children to be served by said facility. A location in the Rose Ridge section of Dickinson County has been selected for consolidated high school, middle school, and technical school. New elementary school will be located in the area yet to be determined in the area of Sand Lick, Hayside, or Clinchco. Doesn't say anything about Ridgeview. The parties hereby acknowledge that contractual commitments, contract, have been made to third parties. Funds have been paid to third parties based on these locations, and the parties hereto irrevocably. That means we don't change. We stay the same direction. Irrevocably commit that these locations shall be the location upon which the above referenced educational facility shall be constructed. Now, if Quisenberry is going to do some evaluations, I think they need to be looking at all three sites, not Ridgeview as one of them, at least one more in the centrally located area of the children to be served. The K&C report by the school board back 2018 showed two clusters of the school population. K5, one cluster in Clintwood, one cluster in Sand Lake Hayside community. The middle school, two clusters, Clintwood, Hayside, Sand Lake communities. High school, two clusters, Clintwood, Hayside, Sand Lake communities. Reasonably located, centrally located to the children to be served. That tells me that this is not going to be a school that's going to be centrally located at Ridgeview. If you look at Clinchco versus the Hayside Sand Lake community, if you build a school at Clinchco, your major cluster of students are coming from Sand Lake and Hayside. Why would you not consider that at least get prices or something other from Quisenberry on one of those sites? Back when we first started this rodeo, there was an estimate that Upper Backbone Ridge would cost $5.5 million to prepare. All right, from the newspapers, I see figures of $27 million. I'm assuming that $27 million includes the $2 million estimate for road improvement. Have we had discussions with the Board of Supervisors about how that can be funded through Coal Road severance money? It says to prepare the Clinchco site would be similar, didn't put a dollar figure, would be similar to the preparation of the Backbone Ridge site. Similar means the same shape, not necessarily the same size. So similar could be $8, $9, $10 million to prepare Clinchco. Hopefully Quisenberry would be able to figure that out. Back in 2016-17, Mr. Barton, finance officer for the school system, prepared a chart that shows the cost per pupil from each school. And out of the elementary schools, Irvington Elementary came in at $10,439 per student. And we see when budget issues roll around, first thing on the block is, gotta close Irvington, gotta close Irvington. Well, if we gotta close Irvington, it costs $9,738 per student at Ridgeview. It's only $600 difference. So why not close Ridgeview too? But I know that's a ludicrous comparison. But if the $27 million price tag at Backbone, if $2 million of it is road improvement, then let's have some discussions with the Coal Road Committee, with the Board of Supervisors. There's close to $9 million in the Coal Road Fund at the county level. No use getting VDOT to do all that. We could probably do a contract with somebody private who would come in and do that. But all of our concentration has been on Ridgeview. I'll finish up with this. Back in one of our joint meetings, I had asked the question, could the Sand Lake site be part of a campus and be used as part of the school campus for recreation, parking, and so forth? I'd received a reply from Mr. Ken Woodard, and I'll read this and then I'll sit down. It says, I will try to summarize your question as I understood it and their answer. You had asked if Sand Lake Elementary property could be used for construction of a relocated school by constructing the new building outside the floodplain and floodway and possibly constructing a two-story structure in order to reduce the building footprint. Those areas within the floodplain could be used for ball fields, playgrounds, parking, etc. You had also asked whether areas of the site within the floodplain and floodway could count toward a VDOT or Virginia DOE guideline that requires a 9-acre site for a school of this size. We discussed this with you and the Virginia Department of Education. Neither agency is opposed to including floodplain and floodway areas within the 9-acre site, as long as all federal, state, and local laws are met. This includes not placing field or structures within the floodplain without the proper permits. It could be done, just has to be permitted. Then we asked, when I was on the Board of Supervisors, we asked T&L to do us an estimate on what it would take to move the little hill behind the football bleachers at Sand Lake. And they arrived at a 2-to-1 slope comparison, a 2-acre site, 563,000 cubic yards of dirt and earth to be moved. Most of it would have to be off-site according to them, but I think if we got a little creative we could keep half of it or more on site. So think about those facts. And I don't know whether you can expand Quisenberry's study or not. But I'd sure hate to see us spend an extra $4 or $5 million when we didn't need to, especially at Sand Lake Elementary, where you have water, sewer, internet, ready access to the community. And I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of over 300 kids within 4 miles of the school. And we're going to bus them up to Sand Lake, or Clinchco, rather. Or we're going to bus them to Ridgeview. For 500 students, Sand Lake School's up here at Ridgeview, and the community's back over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Next on the list is Kathy Harrison.
Good evening, Chairman, Ms. Robinson, members. At least 2 of you already know everything that I've ever had to say, but I've got 3 new people that I can talk to. I agree with Mr. Yates. Relocating Sand Lake to Rose Ridge, Ridgeview, is telling the community and telling all of Dickinson County and all of Virginia, you are building Sand Lake, a school at Ridgeview, instead of building their replacement school within a reasonable distance to the children that it serves. You are contemplating building a relocated Sand Lake at Ridgeview. Now that's I just can't really wrap my head around that. Even Clinchco, even though it says in the Facilities Development Agreement, that school has already been torn down. I feel like after you tore that school down and you accepted the money for it, the kids that were there, they're in the high school now, because my nephew was in kindergarten when they got notification the day he graduated that he would not be attending Clinchco Elementary the next year, but he would be going to Sand Lake. And that's how fast that decision happened. But that school's gone. And I feel like Mr. Yates, at least give some consideration to the Sand Lake site. At least give some consideration to the Backbone site. See if there is something that you may have missed that someone else might come up with. We all know, whether we all want to say it or not, if this had been put in place 4 years ago, as it should have been, there was money there to build at Backbone. This project kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back until Mr. Ellswick was able to say the money is not there to build at Backbone. And even then, no one wants to say the word consolidation for elementary schools. I take that back. Dr. Lyle has said that he would like to see all the elementary schools consolidated at Ridgeview. But there is not enough money to do that. And if you only have enough money to build a 500 or 564 student school at Ridgeview, and you expect all the students from Sand Lake to come, but you expect the elementary students that live on Rose Ridge to pass up a brand new school and go to Clintwood, which I know is in a car is less than 10 minutes away, because just out of curiosity I drove it. So you'd have 2 elementary schools 10 minutes apart, you're going to have, if you build at Ridgeview, you're going to have to find a way to consolidate it, and you're going to have to say the word, and you're going to have to own it. Otherwise, what you are saying is we're building Sand Lake, a school at Ridgeview. Now, either one of them, in my opinion, is not right, but that's the choice that you have. And I know the hearing is about the PPEA. I'm sure the company that you have picked, two companies you've picked, will do a good job. But I think that the board could give them a little more guidance, a little more leeway, to look at maybe some other sites. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Next on the list is Darrell Edwards.
Good evening, board members, superintendent, and the lawyer. I don't hardly where to start, but I feel like that I'm a little bit responsible for all this discussion because they were going to build a school at where it sits now on take the mountain off, and to take that mountain off, it took our family cemetery and another cemetery would have to be removed. So me and my brother went to Mr. Robinson and told her that we would really dread to see our people moved and done away with. And she said she readily agreed. That she said maybe we could look for an alternative site. I have a hard time saying some words, but anyway. I feel like that what has happened here is the kids have been forgotten. You know, you on the school board, I sit on the school board, and we promised that we would furnish every kid in the county with a quality education. That was one of our obligations, and we tried when I was on the school board. And I just think that we need to take a look at building a school on the Sand Lake site. It's already all the infrastructure is there, every bit, everything, and all you have to do is remove a bunch of dirt. Now, I believe an estimate was $7 million. That was Thompson Litton's estimate. That would leave even that. I think that's too high. But even that would leave 714 that's $17 million to build Sand Lake Elementary School. And I am literally positive that it can be done. And that way the kids would be well taken care of. You wouldn't lose. They would. My heads get too full. But the point is, if you build that school anywhere else, Clinch Cove or Ridgeview, you're gonna lose. Up by your own estimation, by the school board's own estimation, you're gonna lose at least 100 kids. Now, where are you gonna reach back and get that money from? What are you gonna do, raise taxes? You know? So it's just absolutely, in my opinion, it's absolutely asinine to think about doing something like that. You're not thinking about the kids. You're thinking about some other reason, and I don't know. There ain't no good reason to build it at Ridgeview. There is no good reason, because the kids don't have to travel as far, and it's just it don't make any sense. So I beg you, school board members, to think about the kids that you're supposed to be taking care of, and not some other reason when you make your decision. I appreciate you, and I've been praying to God that the school board would look to the Lord for guidance and take care of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. That's all that's on this list.
Just, again, the number to call for public comment at our public hearing for the PPA process is 835-1620. And board members, if you'll just allow just a few minutes for incoming calls, and I'm sure our staff will let us know if we do have any more. Dr. Lyon, we have no more calls. Mr. Wallace, if you hear one, let us know. No calls. Thank you, sir.
That brings us down to item 2, discussion of FY21 budget.
Dr. Lyle, before we get to that, I think in talking with Mr. Ellswick, just to make sure that Skanska has their marching orders, I think that having looked at the proposals and gone through the public hearing, just a simple motion would be in order that we continue to work with the Quisenberry OWPR Lane Group with the goal of drafting an interim agreement for design of the new school. And basically that motion would just be, as I just stated, but it gives Curtis and Skanska direction to be going out, talking with them, and working on bringing back sometime in a month or so a draft of an agreement we would look at. There's no requirement to enter into it, but something we could look at and begin evaluating for what design would look like of a new school within our budget. There's still no location picked. It's just moving forward with what a design within the budget would look like. And to be clear, the location will be important, and that will be something for you all to decide, but ultimately, neither Skanska nor Quisenberry really care where you build the school. They want it to be a pad that's in compliance with Department of Education rules, but ultimately building a school on a flat pad looks a lot the same whether it's at Ridgeview, Clinchco, or somewhere else. So the goal is to continue to design a school that would be within our budget and to work with that team to do that. So that's the motion I think Mr. Elzick would like for us to make tonight.
I make that motion that we continue to work, the school board continues to work with the Quisenberry Group in the process of determining where to build an elementary school.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I vote no on that. just, and I may not be understanding Mr. Mullins correctly, but for me, I would just think that it would be prudent to revise the PPA to include at least one more site, but not specifically contradicting the design phase of it.
And to be clear, and I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Hackney, the work that would be done would be, of course, getting the information about the sites, but primarily focused on doing an agreement so they could start design work on a school. The work is more focused on the design work relating to the school, but Mr. Hackney correctly stated the position that, as I've understood, his last no vote was that he was not objecting to the team, only the limitation of the sites, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so with that, I think, I want to make sure there's clarity about what we're doing, and if everybody's okay with that, then we can move on.
The motion carries 4-1 then. Now,
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lyle. Good evening, board members. I just wanted to take an opportunity to, again, thank the members of the Board of Supervisors for meeting with us yesterday. I appreciated their candor and their honesty and their remarks during the meeting. I was especially grateful for members of the Board of Supervisors to recognize that perhaps with the budget meetings we could have met early in March between the school board and the Board of Supervisors. I appreciated that very much. I appreciate the chair stating that the school board was not made aware of the school board's position regarding the percentage for RLM until May 11th, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that it was Ms. Sluss who recognized that it was difficult for any organization to address drastic cuts and that incremental cuts were less impactful. I appreciate the county administrator understanding that the budget for the school board and the county are completely different, as each organization has completely different goals and responsibilities. I appreciate the dialogue, and I hope that it continues on and that we continue to communicate. For the last week and a half, we have been having meetings with, Zoom meetings with Dr. Lane, and today at 2 o'clock, the governor announced the phases and steps to begin schools in August. And beginning of school in phase 2 may include remote new instruction, learning for some students, staggered schedule on different days of the week for others, social distancing requirements, recommendation of wearing masks, providing breakfast and lunch to children daily, whether they're in school or not, daily temperature checks for student and staff, and it also may include being prepared for school closures during the school year. With the COVID-19 pandemic and all the unknowns for school opening for next school year, as I've shared with you before, this is by far the most challenging budget I think we have faced together. The challenges of this budget are made more difficult by COVID-19 and the reality that these cuts have a negative effect on children. Our focus for the last 2 weeks is to minimize the impact of these budget cuts on our students and our staff. Based on the governor's comments today and guidance on reopening schools from the Virginia Department of Education regarding social distancing and other issues, I am recommending that the option of the closure of Irvington Elementary School and the consolidation of buses not be considered by the school board this evening. Quite frankly, this is not the year to do this, to close this school for children. However, I do want everyone to understand that unless the Board of Supervisor in the future can find ways to increase funding, we're not going to be able to maintain the 3-school model. This is not a matter of opinion. As you know, the last board meeting, Mr. Barton updated you on the annual cost of this work. In his estimates in 2018, we need an additional $1 million per year in addition to the operating funds for the next 15 years to simply maintain 2 schools in an acceptable state of repair. From what we heard yesterday at the board meeting, I think we all walked away understanding that we could not and would not receive the level of funding. And of course, our public needs to be aware of those facts. However, what is more subtle, and I think more inevitable, is to the public is this. The adverse impact on education when these cuts are drastic, when they're abrupt, and they're absorbed by other means than closing a school are significant. The $1.1 million cut is real, and its effects will be felt, K through 12 and in all of our schools. The cuts will negatively impact the educational environment, and they will negatively impact children. We, as a board, and I, as the division superintendent, commit that we will do our best to minimize that impact. But unless significant changes are made in the way we fund education, I don't see a better future. Our students deserve what every other child in the Commonwealth of Virginia enjoy and have as their education. This morning, Mr. Barton met with the county administrator, and through the CARES Act, the county, the Board of Supervisors have committed $140,000 in additional funds for the budget. And so I'd like to ask Mr. Barton if he would please come to the front to present.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
Mr.
Give you a moment to hand those out. So Ms. Robinson should have given each one of you 2 sheets. The first one's titled Budget Changes Already Made. Starts out with the yellow part at the top and then blue. We'll get into this first. Basically, this is a pickup of where we were last week. Looking at the state budget cut, $398,305, and then the local budget of $600,000. So we had a total cut to revenues from our budget that was approved on 3/25/20 of $998,305. This first sheet that we're looking at, I've spent some time this past week going back through the budget. I've worked a lot on the current year's budget, looking at our year-end expenditures, re-estimating our revenue, posting actual May numbers and placing my estimates. And first off, we've made some changes and come up with a little bit more money that we can carry over from fiscal year 20 into fiscal year 21. So we're looking at approximately $250,000 carryover. After I'd done that, I went back through the fiscal year 21 budget, line by line, looking at everything that we had in there. We updated some numbers based on some updated information that we had and looked again at our estimates. I'll go through some of these changes that we've made. And so some of those, starting off, is going to be the additional cost of unemployment. We're currently up to about an additional $62,000 on that. We went and removed the 1% raise. These are items that we've already talked about throughout the process. So additional 1% was to get us up to the 2% in year 1 to qualify for the state funding. That saved $155,905. We removed the additional funding added for the coaching scale revision of $22,000. We've talked in the past couple of weeks about some teacher retirements. We went ahead and accounted for those 2 retirements of $19,644 savings. We adjusted for savings for a counselor retirement, savings for a secretary retirement, and then savings for a change in minimum wage, pushing the date from January 1st, 21 to May 1st, 21. That was about $35,000. I'd found out just before the meeting last week, we received our renewal for our VACOR, work comp, and property and casualty insurance that came in about $16,000 less than our estimates. And then there's a lot of little changes in the budget. Updated revenues for our federal title programs, adjusted the retiree health insurance premium to account for the new retirements, added additional revenue and expenditures for the summer feeding program, and added some additional costs for the 10 extra days of schools that's budgeted, and several other miscellaneous cuts of about $48,000 together with those. As Ms. Robinson shared, had a productive meeting with Mr. Moore this morning on the additional CARES Act funding from the Board of Supervisors, and that contributed an additional $140,000 to our budget for this year. So the updated budget graph that I have leaves us $338,884 that we need to look at tonight. So does anybody have any questions on that first sheet? The second sheet is going to be, it's labeled potential budget cuts at the top. These are items that we have talked about in the past. I don't think there's anything new on here. Based on some items that we've already adjusted in our budget, some of these totals may have been updated. But I want to go through first on the options that the board has recommended to reduce this $338,884 that we need. One option was removing the salary step for fiscal year 21, $165,000. Moving bus drivers to employee-only insurance, $281,160. Reducing the number of coaching positions, $25,900. And a 30% increase in employee health insurance premiums. This would be the portion that the employees pay, approximately $86,000 it would save. Lastly, on the board recommended options is eliminating the purchase of one bus for $95,000. We have 2 in our budget currently and have for the past few years. Of course, that was an option to reduce that down to 1. Some other considerations that we have, of course, Ms. Robinson mentioned that we're not going to be looking at Irvington Elementary School or the existing bus runs, consolidating those due to where we're at right now. It would be eliminating 8 part-time aides at the elementary school level, be about $65,000 savings. And then we have 3 staff positions here next that would, it's through attrition, through some retirements that we have. The first would be to move existing staff to fill the secretary vacancy that we have, approximate savings of $55,824. A custodian vacancy, moving existing staff to cover that, would save $61,192. And a guidance vacancy, moving existing staff to cover that, $86,420. Each of those 3 options would reduce 1 full-time person through attrition. These are kind of the options that we're looking at, and we'll need some input from the board tonight.
And board members, since part of our options is about staff, I may ask if we could go into closed session so we can talk about specific staffing issues there if you so wish, but certainly the other options are available for your discussion.
Any comment from the board before we go to closed session? Pursuant to section 2.2-3711, paragraph A of the Code of Virginia, I move the board convene a closed session for the purpose of discussion and consideration of the assignment and continuing employment of specific employees of the school system pursuant to Virginia Code section 2.2-3711A1 and for the purpose of discussion or consideration of the investment of public funds pursuant to PPEA procedure for construction of a new elementary school pursuant to Virginia Code section 2.2-3711A and 6. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We're now in closed session.